core to the unmatched performance is the most powerful chip made for iPhone.
So I've been using the iPhone 17 Pro Max for a few weeks now, and it was a nice upgrade from my iPhone 11 Pro Max. Bigger display, better cameras, better battery life, and much more. But one area that I was particularly interested in when this phone came out is the SoC. The A19 Pro is currently the best chip Apple has to offer for iPhone users, and the difference is especially noticeable if you're upgrading from an older iPhone like me. But in this video, I want to dive a little deeper into the components that make up the A19 Pro and my experience with them, including what I liked and maybe what I didn't like as much. From speed to thermals to security, there's quite a few things to discuss. Starting with the CPU, the A19 Pro delivers very good performance on a daily basis. It's fast and consistent, so pretty much what you'd expect from a chip inside a Pro iPhone. Now, I can't tell you how much better it is compared to the A18 Pro because I don't own an iPhone 16 Pro or 16 Pro Max myself, but Apple did say that it would perform up to 40% better. And while the benchmarks may not necessarily reflect that much of an improvement, we are seeing better figures than those of the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max across both single-core and multi-core performance. I also think it may be worth giving the A19 Pro some credit here because its level of performance is actually comparable to the M2 lineup from 2022 and 2023. So more specifically, the A19 Pro brings better single-core performance than the M2, M2 Pro, and M2 Max and matches the multi-core performance of the M2. But is the A19 Pro the chip that offers the best CPU performance in a phone? The answer is no. While we've gotten used to Apple leading the phone industry in terms of CPU performance for many years, that has changed recently. And it's not that Apple is not improving, it's that Qualcomm is making more significant improvements to the point where they're overtaking Apple. If we consider the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 4 from last year, we'll find that the A19 Pro essentially does better in single-core performance, but just about the same, if not a little worse, in multi-core performance. The new Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5, on the other hand, reduces the gap in single-core performance and increases the gap in multi-core performance, and so Apple is really being tested here. But going back to the notion of day-to-day use, I doubt the benchmarks would translate to a noticeable difference in speed between the A19 Pro and its Snapdragon rivals. And if you choose to get an iPhone 17 Pro or 17 Pro Max over an Android device with a recent Snapdragon 8 Elite chip, it wouldn't exactly be a downgrade. Both options would result in you getting excellent performance out of your phone, including for heavier tasks. Now, another positive aspect about the A19 Pro is that it's better at sustaining a high level of performance over an extended period of time compared to previous iterations of A series chips. This brings me to my next focus, which is the vapor chamber. The vapor chamber inside this iPhone has been a very good addition from Apple. Along with the aluminium enclosure, it helps in spreading out the heat generated by the phone, resulting in a lower peak temperature compared to previous iPhones. But what's more important is the effect that this has in terms of the performance of the A19 Pro. On many occasions, I find myself using multiple apps and switching back and forth between them, and this kind of workload can lead to higher temperatures, especially if the apps themselves are more demanding. Now, on an older iPhone, you may find that it may start to perform slightly lower because of the need for thermal throttling when the CPU reaches high temperatures. That was something I observed as I kept using my previous iPhone 11 Pro Max, and it was even more noticeable whenever I had low power mode on. But it looks like this has now become a thing of the past. Even after a few hours of use in one sitting, I could not observe any noticeable decline in my iPhone 17 Pro Max's CPU performance, including on low power mode. Now, I mentioned using multiple apps, and the relevance of using multiple apps on a daily basis actually extends beyond the CPU and the thermals. Let's talk a bit about RAM. One of the highlights of this year's iPhones is the amount of RAM that Apple decided to include in them. While the standard iPhone 17 has the standard A19 chip with 8GB of RAM, which is the same amount of RAM as last year's iPhones, Apple increased the amount of RAM with the A19 Pro to 12GB in the iPhone Air, as well as in the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max. This is a very welcome increase from Apple. A 50% increase in RAM already makes a pretty significant difference, let alone if you're upgrading from an older device with less than 8GB of RAM, like in my case. The iPhone 11 Pro Max had 4GB of RAM, and let me just tell you, triple the RAM makes a huge difference. By the time iOS 18 was released, RAM management on the iPhone 11 Pro Max had deteriorated quite a bit. Whenever I'd be using multiple apps, the 4GB of RAM would have a hard time keeping some of the apps ready to go in the background, and that was even more problematic when I needed to turn on low power mode. But as far as RAM goes, I can honestly say that my experience with the 12GB of RAM in the iPhone 17 Pro Max has so far been really good. You're basically getting what you'd expect with that much RAM, and that's keeping the apps running in the background so that you don't need to reload them when you decide to come back to them. Lastly, I wanted to discuss an area that perhaps hasn't received as much attention as it probably should have, and that's memory integrity enforcement. So what is memory integrity enforcement, or MIE? It's essentially a new security system that helps Apple stop hackers from exploiting memory bugs. In other words, it makes your iPhone less likely to be compromised in the event of a memory corruption. It works by allocating a unique tag to each piece of memory, and also allocating a matching tag to each pointer, a pointer being an object that stores a memory address. So when an app tries to access your memory, both tags will be checked. If they match, access to the relevant piece of memory is granted. If they don't match, access is denied immediately. MIE combines smarter memory organization with real-time tag checking that prevents exploits that are based on bugs and vulnerabilities like buffer overflows and use after free. The tags themselves are well hidden and constantly changed, making it harder for attackers to reach them. The good thing about MIE is that it's always on and there is very little impact, if any, on the performance of your iPhone. Of course, the A19 Pro also gets credit here because it's a powerful chip to begin with. Now, when I first heard of MIE, I immediately thought of Windows Core Isolation, which is also pretty interesting. While MIE is primarily concerned with protecting the memory from exploits, Core Isolation focuses on protecting the kernel, and both systems achieve their goals in different ways. With the A19 and A19 Pro, we're looking at memory tagging, but with Core Isolation, Windows takes advantage of CPU virtualization capabilities, keeping the critical parts of Windows in some sort of virtual space that can be described as an isolated and secure container. Some Windows users may have faced issues running virtual machines or emulators because of interference from their hypervisor, like Hyper-V, with some emulators complaining about things like Hyper-V being turned on, which brings me to the notion that Core Isolation can actually be turned on and off, unlike MIE, which is always on. Now, of course, it's worth mentioning that you may be lowering your security if you have Core Isolation disabled for no good reason. So if you don't need to have it turned off, it would be good to turn it back on. But going back to the A19 Pro, MIE is an important step forward in security for Apple devices. This is basically Apple acknowledging that even though iPhones and iOS have been very secure over the years, Apple still aims to make the most of opportunities to further improve security. But with that being said, there are some potential limitations that Apple will need to manage as time goes by to ensure that MIE remains effective. For example, MIE is not just a feature. Think of it as a multi-layer system where the layers must work together harmoniously. So that includes how the memory is allocated and tracked, how the tags are assigned and checked, how the tags are hidden securely, and how the A19 Pro and iOS 26 coordinate and agree on the relevant rules. Now, the potential concern here for some is that MIE is very complex, and if it's not properly optimized, it can increase the chance of error, like a particular tag not being properly updated, or when there is a mismatch between software instructions and hardware behavior. If something like that were to materialize, it could create an opportunity for attackers to bypass MIE. But definitely let me know what you think about MIE and the A19 Pro in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, share and subscribe. And feel free to let me know in the comments if there is anything tech you're interested in and want me to make a video about. Also, please consider supporting me by donating to my channel through buymeacoffee.com. I would really appreciate any support as I continue to bring fun and interesting content like this. Only if you can, of course. Link down below. This was the Wizard of Tech, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.